Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. Today I will address a topic which actually was more popular about 2 years ago than it is now, but there still are occasional discussions of it. There were a lot of videos, for example, that were posted on YouTube that dealt with some of the strange sounds that were heard around the world. Some of those sounds were reported as sounding like trumpets, others like explosions, others like the sound of construction. There were and have been numerous speculations for what those sounds might have been, for what caused them. There still are, as far as I know, no complete and full answers or resolutions to that issue. I will attempt in this radio broadcast to provide some type of answer to it. Obviously, I am just speculating. I have no more access to this kind of knowledge than anyone else. I'm not an expert on sounds of any sort. I'm a sociologist. However, I have looked at this issue. I've considered some of the different explanations that various people have given for these sounds. And I've come to some conclusions, tentative conclusions, and so I will offer those in this broadcast. If you want to hear what those sounds are like, pretty easy. Just type in the words "strange sounds" in quotes into the YouTube search box, and you'll come up with a lot of video files which actually have these sounds recorded. Some of them are also accompanied by various visual images like unusual lights in the sky or orbs, or some people have allegedly reported spacecraft in the area, extraterrestrial or transterrestrial spacecraft in the area. So I will consider several different explanations, and then basically do it as a kind of process of elimination, going through an explanation, describing it hopefully as fairly as I possibly can, and then moving on to the next one. This information comes from my Unific Evolution book, which is at evolution.bahaifaith.info. Baha'i Faith, one word, B as in boy, AHAIFAITH.info. Evolution.bahaifaith.info. And I will have that URL posted directly below the video in the information part of this program, so that you can actually go there and read it for yourself if you like. I will be reading sections of this. I'm not going to bore you with the whole thing. I realize that it's not that pleasant to listen to somebody simply read something over the air, but I will read certain parts of it and then summarize other parts and also make some additional comments. As I said, there have been various strange sounds reported around the world. Whatever they might be, they were widely reported and recorded globally. There have been many speculations, like I said, but no firm conclusions have yet been drawn. A number of explanations for the strange sounds have been offered. Not all of them are necessarily valid or plausible. Obviously, since I am not making the sounds, and since I don't know who the culprits are, anything I write or say on this subject is just conjecture. Some of the sounds are hoaxes. Some of them are imitations, where people took the sound and simply lifted it and then added it to another video. So basically, they just repeating the same type of sound that was heard before. Perhaps the original sound was authentic, maybe, but the later ones are just imitations. Some of the sounds might have legitimate natural or technological explanations. There was an article posted on the website of the U.S. Geological Survey which likened the sounds to sonic booms. However, the author acknowledged that military aircraft could not explain all of the reported sounds. Therefore, the explosions are preternatural. Preternatural meaning of unknown causation. I will read a portion of what this person wrote. His name was not included in the article. The title of the article is Earthquake Booms, Seneca Guns, and Other Sounds. It was uploaded on July 18th of 2012. The thing that comes closest to matching all of the observations is sonic booms from military aircraft. In the Myrtle Beach case, the Air Force claimed responsibility and said that they had been conducting training exercises at the time. The seismologist whom I called in Virginia reported that during the 1970s, Seneca guns, which refers to mysterious noises sometimes heard off of the coast of Virginia and the Carolinas, were heard on the coast of Virginia. Reporters and seismologists investigated for several weeks, but were unable to determine the cause. Finally, the Navy admitted that one of their planes had caused a sonic boom. The problem with sonic booms is that they cannot explain Seneca guns that occurred before supersonic jets. Naval ships firing their guns offshore might have produced some of the booms. Under certain atmospheric conditions, sounds can travel farther than usual, so that might be heard offshore as loud booms. Earthquakes are also a possible cause. In southeastern North Carolina, earthquake lists show seven events between 1871 and 1968. Each event was reported by people who felt it or heard it. The problem with the earthquake explanation is that something that is felt or heard that strongly should have been recorded on nearby seismographs. These are the instruments that record ground shaking for seismologists to analyze. A seismologist in Virginia who has tried has never been able to match any of the reported Seneca guns with his seismograph records, and he has tried lots of times over the years. There does not appear to be any agreement on what causes the Seneca guns. They have been occurring in several places around the eastern U.S. and in India for at least a century or two. As far as I can tell, they have worried people, but they have never caused damage or injury. The Earth is a complex place, and there is a lot about it that we don't understand. Perhaps someday we will understand what causes Seneca guns, but right now we don't understand what makes them. However, they do not seem to pose a threat to anyone. Okay, so that is where we begin, and now I'll begin with certain descriptions of what the sounds appear like. One person wrote, "In the past few weeks and months, people all over the world have been reporting hearing strange sounds that are like groaning, loud trumpets, or voices coming out of nowhere. It could be a hoax or a partial hoax, but I think at least most of it is real." Well, whether that's true, I don't know. That's obviously speculative. On the other hand, there are discussions of the sounds of trumpets and the sounds of thunder that are mentioned in various biblical texts. For example, in the book of Exodus, chapter 19, verse 19, "When the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder." Perhaps even more commonly cited from the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse, chapter 8, verses 7 through 13. The first angel blew his trumpet, and there came hail and fire, mixed with blood, and they were hurled to the earth. And a third of the earth was burned up, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers, and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many died from the water, because it was made bitter. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light was darkened. A third of the day was kept from shining, and likewise the night. Then I looked, and I heard an eagle crying with a loud voice as it flew in mid-heaven, Woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, as the blasts of the other trumpets that the three angels are about to blow. Both of those quotations are from the New Revised Standard Version. Now, the term trumpets is referred to extensively in the Baha'i texts, where it is used generally as a synonym for the Word of God, revelation, in effect the announcement of revelation, much like Baha'u'llah from an Islamic perspective is sometimes referred to as the Great Announcement. So a trumpet can be seen as a kind of announcement of the Word of God, or revelation of the Word of God. In addition, Tahireh, the first female disciple of the most exalted Bab, the forerunner of Baha'u'llah, was, figuratively speaking, an angelic trumpeter, according to Shoghi Effendi. That is how he describes her. I'll read a brief section. This is from the book God Passes By, pages 32 to 34. I'll read just a portion of it. A little over 4 years had elapsed since the birth of the Bab's revelation, when the trumpet blast announcing the formal extinction of the old and the inauguration of the new dispensation was sounded. The trumpeter was a lone woman, the noblest of her sex in that dispensation, whom even some of her co-religionists pronounced a heretic. The call she sounded was the death knell of the 1200-year-old law of Islam, accelerated 20 years later by another trumpet blast announcing the formulation of the laws of yet another dispensation. This process of disintegration, associated with the declining fortunes of a superannuated, though divinely revealed law, gathered further momentum, referring to the laws of Islam. In addition to trumpets, there are predictions of various kinds of roaring and terrifying sounds in the books of Jeremiah and Isaiah. For example, from the book of Jeremiah, You therefore shall prophesy against them these words, and say to them, The Lord, which is a translation of YHWH, Yahweh, will roar from on high, and from his holy habitation utter his voice. He will roar mightily against his fold, and shout, like those who tread grapes, against all the inhabitants of the earth. The clamor will resound to the ends of the earth, for the Lord has an indictment against the nations. He is entering into judgment with all flesh. and the guilty he will put to the sword, says the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, see, disaster is spreading from nation to nation, and a great tempest is stirring from the farthest parts of the earth. And from Isaiah 24, verses 17 to 23, a portion of that, terror and the pit and the snare are upon you, O inhabitants of the earth. Whoever flees at the sound of terror shall fall into the pit, and whoever climbs out of the pit shall be caught in the snare. For the windows of heaven are opened, and the foundations of earth tremble. The earth is utterly broken, the earth is torn asunder, the earth is violently shaken. The earth staggers like a drunkard, it sways like a hut. Its transgression lies heavily upon it, and it falls, and will not rise again. On that day the Lord will punish the host of heaven in heaven, and on earth the kings of the earth. Well, here are some of the explanations which have been offered by various people for the sounds that have been heard recently. One explanation is acoustic weaponization. For instance, as some people have speculated, the sounds are a part of a field experiment. In effect, the government, or some governments or governments, have been intentionally making these sounds in order to gauge public reaction to them. And so, perhaps at first, they simulated trumpet-like sounds. Other times they made sounds that were like explosions. At other times, construction sounds, in order to judge how people were reacting to it. So that's what a field experiment is. In other words, an experiment done in the field as opposed to in a laboratory or a controlled setting. Here is a description of what acoustic weapons are for. This is from the Defense Research and Development Canada, and it's from December of 2004. Acoustic weapons are devices that are used to aim mechanical energy at a target using sound waves and air pressure as carriers. While the use of sound as a weapon of psychological warfare in historical battles has been written about since antiquity, verification is impossible. More recently, sounds in the audible range has been used in psychological warfare operations, creating a variety of effects, depending on the frequency or wavelength and intensity of the sound. Hearing interference, performance degradation, pain, temporary hearing loss, and tissue damage. In crowd control situations, sound blasters have been used to deter or repel people, and are commercially available to police and military forces. So that's one possibility. I don't necessarily give that much credence, but I mentioned it. Another possibility, which has been suggested by a fellow named Steve Quayle, who is a popular individual online, is the use of shockwave weapons. Now, I don't really give this much credence, but I will read what Mr. Quayle has to say. Strange sounds or hums have been heard in Kiev in the Ukraine, as well as in Colorado before the quake, and he, Steve Quayle, connected them with the possible use of what he called shockwave weapons. There's a lot of manipulation going on, Quayle said, and there is technology that can not only steer or direct hurricanes, but can initiate volcanoes and earthquakes, according to two former Secretaries of Defense, which Quayle cited. That's another explanation. Again, I don't give that much credence either, but I mention it because it's something that has been out there. Another possibility, something which has been discussed a fair amount online, is that these sounds might be kinds of aggressive maneuvers or weapons used against extraterrestrial or transterrestrial spacecraft. For example, this is according to Linda Moulton Howe, who is a journalist specializing in edge alternative type issues, has a very popular website. She is a regular guest on the show Coast to Coast AM. She's also a guest on Whitley Strieber's show Dreamland. This is a quotation from Linda Moulton Howe from a show she did on Coast to Coast back in 2012. A large bang over 5 English counties provoked calls to emergency services. Later, the UK's Ministry of Defence said that the sound was a sonic boom from 2 Typhoon jets launched to investigate an unusual emergency signal coming from a small helicopter hovering over Bath in Somerset County. But Earthfiles, which is her website, has received information from an English mother whose adult son watched a silver disc above the small helicopter, and the UK Sun, which is a British newspaper, published a photograph of what it called a stocking-shaped UFO, meaning on your foot. One witness said that 2 Typhoon jets did show up and kept circling the stocking-shaped UFO. It was very strange. Now, what Howe also says is that these sounds were commonly followed by helicopter searches, and therefore, perhaps, as the speculation goes, following an attack, military agencies have been looking for extraterrestrials themselves, their crashed spacecraft, and any related artifacts. This is another statement from Ms. Howe. The latest round of unexplained booms started October 17th, 2012, when residents southwest of Providence in Warwick, Rhode Island, were shaken in houses and buildings by a loud bang that some described as sounding like the beginning of war. And another statement from Howe. Over the past 2 years, Earthfiles has reported about many boom mysteries throughout the United States, often followed by low-flying helicopters that seem to be in search mode. That's a summary. Again, if you go directly to this book, this online book, which is free, you can read more about this particular subject. I have a lot of quotations in reference to this subject. I think that is a good enough summary for purposes of a broadcast. But that should be clear. In other words, the idea behind this is that some earthly governments regard these craft as a threat to national security. They are firing at them, and that would explain the sounds. Afterwards, helicopters go around looking for possible relics or people, individuals, extraterrestrials that might have landed as a result of that. Now, another individual who is a Mexican ufologist named Jamie Maussan has a rather unusual suggestion, and in context, some of the other things were obviously unusual too, so this is maybe even more unusual. He suggests that transterrestrials, or extraterrestrials as angels, are literally blowing the trumpets of the apocalypse, the book of Revelation. In other words, he's arguing that these sounds are being made by the spacecraft, the UFOs so-called, themselves. This is a statement by Jamie Mosan and Fernando Correa, who was on Mosan's team. Now finally the evidence we have been waiting for. A craft was recorded in Hong Kong that produces the sounds we've been hearing all around the world. The evidence is finally here. Evidence that relates these sounds with the presence of alien craft. Here's the information from Fernando Correa. On January 21st, 2012, while a mothership flies over Hong Kong, these strange sounds called Trumpets of the Apocalypse were recorded. It's the first time they record a UFO that apparently is generating these mysterious sounds. Could this evidence be the answer to the trumpets of the apocalypse? Now carefully watch the mothership, referring to a video. The image of the mothership in slow motion is impressive. A sphere disappears. There's no conventional explanation for this presence. Watching the video, we realize this is transcendental evidence that relates the UFO phenomenon with the strange sounds that are coming from the mothership. One of the first backgrounds of the trumpets was recorded on August 11th, 2011 in Kiev, Ukraine. Also in Budapest, Hungary on January 11th, 2012. Then in Acosta, Costa Rica on January 12th, 2012. Also in Monterrey, Mexico on February 11th, 2012. The next day, on February 12th, 2012, the trumpets of the apocalypse were heard in Mexico City. Sounds that no one has been able to explain, like the presence of the mothership in Hong Kong. As a warning or a message, it hovers over a city with more than 7 million people while they hear these mysterious sounds, evidence that opens the possibility that UFOs generate the trumpets of the apocalypse. Therefore, the investigation will continue in future broadcasts. Now, I don't take that too seriously, to be honest. That sounds very, very far-fetched, but I figured I'd mention it. It is something which has created a kind of meme or popular idea which has been repeated a lot over the internet, especially on YouTube. So I felt that I should probably address it. Take it for what you like. Now, maybe even more far-fetched than that, if that's possible, some people have suggested that people have been hearing boring machines used to construct deep underground military bases, whether subterranean or suboceanic, research facilities, bomb shelters, air raid shelters, or in other words, protections against natural and man-made disasters. To my knowledge, however, no empirical evidence for these claims has been presented. Now, that is not to say that these shelters do not exist. They do exist. A lot of evidence for that. They are made by boring machines. There are photographs of boring machines that I have some of them on in this book. However, speculating that people can actually hear these sounds is, I think, rather unusual and very, very difficult to substantiate. However, I will read a couple of claims that people have made in relationship to this idea. First, people in and around Mount Shasta hear strange machinery sounds coming from the subterranean tunnels of Mount Shasta. Someone else, it sounds like digging, grinding equipment to me. And if they are doing it all at the same time to make one kind of shelter, then that's why we are hearing it all over the world, because they are all tunneling to get to each other. So I guess she's alleging that people in different countries are building these bases and are trying to connect them in some way with each other. I'm not aware of any evidence that would support that. Other people have gone a bit off the deep end and have made the speculation that these sounds are caused by HAARP. HAARP is an acronym for the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, which is headquartered in Gacona, Alaska. HAARP is very commonly blamed online, especially on far-right libertarian websites, including some YouTube channels, for just about everything. It's a kind of boogeyman, a kind of universal boogeyman that some people use. I am not aware, however, of any evidence that HAARP can create these kinds of sounds, especially sounds with such tremendous variability. Therefore, this is my own personal understanding. Now, I'm not dismissing the other possibilities. I think that perhaps the extraterrestrial war explanation might have some validity. In some cases, I think perhaps some people may be hearing those sounds, the sounds of human beings attacking these craft. But I don't think that's the major reason for these sounds. As a layman, again, to re-emphasize, to me, the most plausible explanation is accelerating geomagnetic changes. For example, observations of spaceships, which were discussed by Mosan and others, have often been reported during cataclysmic events, including natural disasters. Perhaps our planetary guardians, our trans-terrestrial or extraterrestrial guardians, in other words, the angelic beings aboard these spacecraft, are monitoring these potentially disastrous situations. Here is a quotation. This is according to a journalist by the name of Juan Andres Salfati, whose name I probably totally butchered. There are two theories to explain the apparitions of UFOs after a catastrophe. The first is that they live among us, underground, and engage in operations to lift off, thus becoming visible. The other is that they live in a state of vigilance and follow our procedures and reactions. Someone else wrote, the Chilean earthquake was followed by a boom in UFO sightings, meaning an increase in them, but 16 cases occurred on the night of the tragedy alone, some of them accompanied by significant visual material which have been subjected to study by UFO researchers. UFO sightings, someone else wrote, spike in times of war, or what could be called imminent war, especially from the mid-20th century on. So, that is a possibility, I think, that seems to me, anyway, to explain why it is that these craft were there. In other words, it's not that there are people are hearing weapons firing at these extraterrestrials. It's that when there are these disasters, an extraterrestrial spacecraft will show up, and military helicopters will be sent to investigate it. So I think that is a much more logical explanation than that people are actually hearing the sounds of these weapons. Now here is, I think, the most interesting part of this. There is a fellow named Elchin Khalikov, and I don't know how to pronounce his name correctly, so I apologize. I don't know what language that is. It may be Elchin Khalilov, looks correct to me, but I could be wrong. Ph.D. He is connected with the International Committee on Issues of Global Changes of the Geological Environment. Somebody asked him, what is the nature of the unusual, very low-pitched sounds reported by a great number of people in different parts of the planet since the summer of 2011. Many call them the sounds of the apocalypse. Information that comes from all over the world: US, UK, Costa Rica, Russia, the Czech Republic, Australia, etc. Here was his response in part. We have analyzed records of these very low-pitched sounds reported by a great number of people in different parts of the planet since the summer of 2011, and found that most of their spectrum lies within the infrasound range, i.e., is not accessible to humans. What people hear is only a small fraction of the actual power of these sounds. They are low-frequency acoustic emissions in the range between 20 and 100 Hertz, modulated by ultra-low infrasonic waves from 0.1 to 15 Hertz. In geophysics, they are called acoustic gravity waves. They are formed in the upper atmosphere, at the atmosphere ionosphere boundary in particular. There can be quite a lot of causes why these waves are generated: earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, storms, tsunamis, etc. However, the scale of the observed humming sound, in terms of both the area covered and its power, far exceeds those that can be generated by the above-mentioned phenomena. So he continues. In our opinion, the source of such powerful and immense manifestation of acoustic gravity waves must be very large-scale energy processes. These processes include powerful solar flares and huge energy flows generated by them, rushing towards Earth's surface and destabilizing the magnetosphere, ionosphere, and upper atmosphere. Thus, the effects of powerful solar flares, the impact of shock waves in the solar wind, streams of corpuscles and bursts of electromagnetic radiation, are the main causes of generation of acoustic gravitation waves following increased solar activity. Given the surge in solar activity as manifested in the higher number and energy of solar flares since mid-2011, we can assume that there is a high probability of impact of the substantial increase in solar activity on the generation of the unusual humming sounds coming from the sky. And he continues again. There is one more possible cause of these sounds, and it may lie at the Earth's core. The fact is that the acceleration of the drift of the Earth's north magnetic pole, which increased more than fivefold between 1998 and 2003, and is at the same level today, points to an intensification of energy processes in the Earth's core, since it is processes in the inner and outer core that form the Earth's geomagnetic field. Intensification of the energy processes in the Earth's core can modulate the geomagnetic field, which, through a chain of physical processes at the ionosphere, atmosphere boundary level, generates acoustic gravity waves, the audible range of which has been heard by people in the form of frightening low-frequency sound in different parts of our planet. Now, to continue, the same organization, the International Committee on Issues of Global Changes of the Geological Environment, made some very, I would say, shocking predictions. I'm not a climatologist or a climate scientist. I have no way of independently evaluating it. However, I did look around. I tried to debunk it. I was unsuccessful, at least so far. That does not mean that I will not be able to debunk it in the future. I always try to do that, to find possible holes in things. That's what any any academic would do. However, as I said, as of now, it appears to me as though this organization is a legitimate body. I have read through some of their materials. In some cases, one of their publications, for example, includes abstracts by climatologists, each reporting on specific aspects of these kinds of things that are happening. So with that in mind, I'll read you that. This is a collection of materials that was written by this organization and one other organization that apparently works with them. This is the quotation. "We regret to inform you that according to the International Committee GeoChange, which is an acronym for that same group, an extremely high level of seismic and volcanic activity and an increase in the number of tsunamis, hurricanes, floods, and other natural disasters has been predicted planet-wide for between 2011 and 2015, which may lead to huge numbers of victims. We are already witnessing the beginning of this process in the form of various natural cataclysms in many regions of the world. All countries must join their efforts to counter the global intensification of natural disasters and mitigate its negative effect on humanity. Improving the international and national laws on emergency management, rescue operations, coordination of international humanitarian aid, social security for natural disaster victims and their recovery ought to play a key role in this process." Now he continues again. "All long-term forecasts for natural disasters have been made for the period between 2010 and 2016. 2 cycles of increased activity with peaks in 2011 and 2013 and a local minimum in 2012 have been identified in long-term forecasts for large earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis. By 2016, a decline in activity of all geodynamic cataclysms is expected. The expected activity of natural disasters may have a serious negative consequence for the stable progress of civilization, leading to death and destruction unprecedented in human history. Economic implications for countries prone to natural disasters may be catastrophic. It is necessary to unite scientists, international organizations, and governments of various states under UN auspices in order to take effective measures to counter natural disasters and minimize casualties and damage they cause to humanity." So, my interpretation of that, and bear in mind I only read a very brief portion of that. If you would like to read the whole thing again, it is in the book, and an even longer portion is in a PDF file that is linked from the book. I think that from a Baha'i perspective, it sheds light, perhaps, on a statement that was made by Baha'u'llah in the Kitab Aqdas, Baha'u'llah's most holy book, where Baha'u'llah wrote, "The world's equilibrium hath been upset through the vibrating influence of this most great, this new world order. Mankind's ordered life hath been revolutionized through the agency of this unique, this wondrous system, the like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed." I think that statement may relate to several different things. Spiritually, I think it refers to the kinds of transformations that our world is going through, the process of the disintegration of the old world order, and the process of integration leading eventually to a spiritual new world order, the kingdom of heaven on earth, promised by Jesus Christ. However, on a physical level, on a planetary level, I think that literally the world's equilibrium has been upset. And perhaps we are just beginning in this decade of the 21st century, beginning around 2010, to see it. So I think that geomagnetically or planetarily, now is when that statement, perhaps a prophecy, is being fulfilled. Obviously, I could be wrong. However, it is a speculation that I am willing to make. We'll see what happens. Now, again, going back to that statement from that organization, essentially what they are saying is that the two peak years for seismic problems would be 2011, which of course is already passed, and 2013, which as of the moment of this broadcast we are still in. Right now it is March 22nd of 2013 here, and so right now we are still in the first part of 2013, and if he is correct, he's saying that 2013 will be a much more extreme peak than was 2011. I think that perhaps we began to see that, for example, with what happened with Superstorm Sandy, which devastated a huge chunk of the American Northeast, the Jersey Shore, sections of New York City, especially on Staten Island, suburban Long Island, parts of New England that were seriously damaged as well because of Superstorm Sandy. Really a historic storm in many ways. So perhaps that is the beginning. Perhaps we are about to see many more things. In addition to that, there have been statements made that this year that we are in is the year of the comet and the year of the asteroid. I will go ahead and read a couple of statements about that. This is from the Washington Post. 2013 is fast becoming the year of the asteroid. Earth is about to experience a close encounter with an asteroid just days after being buzzed by another space rock. Okay, that was written back in March 6th, 2013. Then, on March 7th, Space.com called 2013 the year of the comet. They wrote, "This year could be the year of the comet, according to some astronomers keeping an eye on icy balls of gas and dust roaming through the solar system. Two comets will brighten the northern hemisphere in a potentially history-making fashion, with the first one coming into view this week." So, if we look at certain things that have been happening in the world around us, that, for example, the emphasis that has been placed recently by many governments on building these deep underground bases and shelters, the concern with security matters, the drone program, basically the turning of many countries into national surveillance states, which obviously bothers a lot of people, especially a lot of libertarians, I suppose, are bothered by that. Me, I don't really care that much, to be honest, but some people are bothered by it. I think if one looks at that, what that tells me, subjectively, is that countries are worried. the world is a very dangerous place right now. As I talk right now, there are crises in Syria, in Iran, in Pakistan, in North Korea, and in other places. Any one of those places might blow up at any time. I don't mean literally blow up, although I suppose that's possible, but I mean could literally catch fire and result in warfare. So given the fact that these earth-shaking events are occurring right now, given the huge amount of political instability, the fact that these earth changes are occurring, which perhaps are being indicated by the unusual sounds that people are hearing, that might be the reason why governments are so concerned. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, I don't think it has anything to do with taking people's guns away. Many people in the gun culture are obsessed with their guns. Sorry to say that, that's my view. God and guns. God and guns go together for many people. And I know some people like that, so I've dealt with them. I try to be polite with them, but I very strongly disagree with them. I don't see any place, for example, in any religious scripture that I am familiar with, where it says that we need to be armed to the tooth to protect ourselves from some type of government. Certainly the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution does not say that. Weapons are allowed for citizens, but not as a way of protecting oneself from the government, rather as a way of assisting the government in warfare. The militia was an alternative at the time the Constitution was being written to establishing a standing army. The Founding Fathers had no objection at that time to a navy, but they didn't want an army. So instead, they felt as though establishing a militia, which would be called up only occasionally when it was absolutely needed, was a much better alternative. Well, we now have an army. We now have a National Guard. That, in my opinion, is the point taken into the 21st century of the Second Amendment. But many people are really attached to their guns. As a result, it's become very difficult in many parts of the United States to find them. Some of that, I think, is a kind of implicit, maybe not so implicit racism. People who are bigoted against President Obama, who see him as a secret Muslim, a secret communist or socialist, and a secret Kenyan, as if there is such a thing. Everyone I know who is a Muslim is proud of it. Everyone I know who is a communist is proud of it. Everyone I know, myself included, who is a socialist is proud of it. I don't know anybody from Kenya, but I assume that they are proud of it too. President Obama, when he moved to Chicago, had the option, if he wanted to, of joining a mosque. He did not. He joined the United Church of Christ, which is a liberal Protestant denomination. He did not join a Muslim mosque. He joined a Christian church. So I think the idea that he is anything but what he claims to be is completely absurd. Yet, in spite of that, there is a lot of fear that many people on the far libertarian right have of President Obama. And so people are stockpiling guns, thinking that that's his objective. I think that's entirely wrong. The government perhaps is aware of the same thing that I have been saying. I assume that the information that I've presented, they know it too. These reports by climatologists are not secret. We all know that there is climate change, there is global warming. these things are having an impact on the world. And I think that they are afraid of what might happen as a result of that. So I think that that pretty much explains it, and it really has nothing to do with taking away people's guns. Well, that's it for today. Until next time, this is Dr. Mark Foster. Have a good one.